Hello, welcome back to another video with the Transfer Portal CFB presented by NoContextCFB. Very excited to dive into, the 2022 season, really start analyzing the quarterback position. Some would say it's the most important position in sports. I can't disagree. Really excited to have an absolute expert on this topic. Dan Orlovsky, pleasure to have you on with us today.
Good to be with you, man. Excited to talk about these guys, these young superstars.
For sure. I can't wait for you to see a lot of the talent that the college game has to offer this season. I know you'll be calling a few of their games and everything, but two of the brightest stars in the sport, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, they're seen as the top draft eligible QBs. They're two of the best players in the game. Like, they're outstanding talents right up there with Will Anderson, I would say. They're three best players in the sport. What do you love about Stroud and Bryce Young, and do you prefer one to the other?
I probably lean a little bit towards CJ Stroud, but that's just because I'm such a fan of Ryan Day and kind of the way he coaches the position. I'll probably start with CJ. I think that is a huge benefit for him, going into not only the season, along with the talent that they have at the wide receiver spot, but just the way that Ryan coaches his quarterbacks and really prepares them for, every situation mentally to have all the answers. He seems like an incredibly bright player, and really has a great understanding of how to attack coverages. I'd say that throwing wise, I love the different pace he puts on a football. I'm such a believer in there's so many different ways to complete passes, certainly in the NFL. And sometimes you got to step on a ball, and then sometimes it's got to have some love on it. And that's a trait that has to be developed. And I think CJ really has a great grasp of that. I think he has a very good understanding of receivers and their angles and the speed that they come out of cuts with. And that goes in a long line of what type of throw is going to be needed in that situation. Incredibly aggressive mind when it comes to throwing the football. And, you love to see the fact that there was a really significant amount of growth throughout the season, and mental toughness throughout the season. So I love everything about him as a passer. Bryce is tremendous. Bryce, I've kind of said, reminds me, he's the first guy that really reminds me of Aaron Rodgers. People are saying Zach Wilson a little bit from BYU, but I think maybe because he had similar things that he did, but style of play reminds me the most of Aaron. I don't know the last kid that came out that made more impressive throws from a awful throwing position. And sometimes I think he does it on purpose, because it's the way that ball is going to come out of his hand in that moment. Twitchy athlete, no play is ever dead. Very sudden with his decision making. It seems as fast as his physical attributes are, he's just as fast mentally. I think the thing that Bryce is probably going to have to deal with going into the league is, it's a really interesting question, is the size. He is smaller in frame. And I think that the NFL world is going to look at some of the young quarterbacks that have come out over the last 5 years or so and said, well, which ones are playing really good? And you go, well, Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, like all those guys have ascended and they're bigger. Lamar may not be huge, but he's bigger than Bryce. Obviously, Josh and Joe and Justin are pretty big dudes. And Bryce isn't. And for the younger guys who have struggled a little bit, that are smaller, Baker Mayfield, Kyler really hasn't taken a big jump. I think that's going to give some in the NFL community a pause. I don't know where I stand on that yet. I was a believer that size really wasn't a big deal. But it hasn't necessarily for some of those guys that are slighter in frame outside of Russell and Drew really transitioned.
That's a really good point too. Just talking about that you're a believer in the fact that the size of QB doesn't matter, but your opinion can always change, and being open to that. Kind of just speaking of those two quarterbacks really quick. I love that you touched on Bryce Young's creativity and playmaking because it is so innate at this level. And then with Stroud, the first pass I think of from him, it's that great touch that he showed against Minnesota in his debut, where he's throwing a crosser to Garrett Wilson. And it's just immaculate. And I think he throws like the best out route in the country. I think he's just the guy that throws like precise airstrikes all over the field. It's nuts.
Yeah, as a passer, like my brain goes just watching him throw the ball when it leaves his hands, it reminds me of just a stronger armed Matt Ryan coming out of BC. Like physical attributes, more athletic, all that stuff, and stronger arm. But Matt, the revolutions of the ball and just watching it spin out of his hands, it reminds me of that.
That's a really dope comparison I haven't heard. Let's move on to DJ Uiagalelei. That's the first time I've actually had to say his name. I usually say DJ. Yeah. But he finds himself in a really tough position at Clemson now. And he's got Cade Klubnik behind him who's threatening to maybe take his job this season. That's going to be a storyline to track. But if you had advice to give to DJ, what's some advice that you'd give him, and how can he plan to get back on track this season?
Yeah, well, I think before giving him advice, it'll be interesting to see how that offensive scheme changes, if at all, for Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
As much success as they have had, I've been a person who thinks that the scheme is become outdated, and it needs to be less reliant on, hey, we're just bigger and better than you, and it needs to give their quarterbacks some easier stuff. I think Deshaun and Trevor kind of covered up a lot of that. So I think that is, if that changes and just gives him some easier throws and easier reads and progressions instead of one guy, I think that in and of itself should help him. If I was going to tell him one thing, and I called a couple of his games and was down on the field pregame, dude, not every ball needs to be absolutely ripped. He is such a talent, and his arm is so strong that I feel young kids want every throw to be the wow. And man, I just threw this 5-yard hitch, 98 miles an hour. My guy didn't catch it because he can't see it, or I missed him by 4 yards, but it was really fast, and I even saw him pregame sometime last year. He would grip the ball so hard and throw the ball so hard that he'd be throwing an out route and the ball wiggled so much. And it's not because he can't throw a spiral. It's just he's straining so hard to throw it so powerfully. And he doesn't have to. His arm is just so in itself good enough. So that would probably be the big thing that I would encourage him, is really becoming more of a quarterback rather than a passer, or becoming more of a passer than just a thrower. I think he's still young and very much so a thrower, and passers, similar to what CJ is, are these guys that, know the different types of throw that are necessary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's such a talented kid. I really hope that situation changes for the better, because dealing with the mediocre offensive line play and then just the completely lackluster receiving room does not help him at all. And then, as you said, the outdated scheme, like, he's not in the best spot for himself, and he's got, a mounted decline this season. Hope he could do it. Remains to be seen. Move on to a guy that transferred, went out, joined Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams at SC. How do you think his game projects at the NFL level?
Yeah, it projects well. I mean, that position right now in the NFL is about playmaking. He's got a lot of playmaking ability. I think that the natural talent that he has, the flick of the wrist throwing motion, the very snap release, bodes well at the league. It'll be interesting to see how he handles some of the, I don't want to call it adversity, but the limelight is very bright now. It obviously was at OU, but it's even bigger when your coach leaves and you leave with them, and now you're at USC, and they're both expected to resurrect that program in many ways. So I want to see what his mental makeup is, what his maturity is, how he can handle that. It's a different world when you go from playing quarterback in college football to being the face of $1 billion company. That's what you are in the NFL. And, as much as we'd like to talk about the physical traits, one of the problems with the NFL in that position is we look at that position the same way we watch defensive tackles. And we just look at the physical, and the physical is usually secondary to the intangible and the mental makeup. And I just want to see how he handles that transition and all of that in the midst of the NIL. And if he can really kind of take ownership of that role physically and talent wise, he's got top pick written all over him. But a lot of guys have, I'm really interested to see how he develops in that regard.
For sure. And I assume you expect a big season from him. Do you think he's a guy that ends up, top 3 in Heisman voting?
Yeah. I mean, Lincoln's guys usually do.
Yeah.
There's plenty of talent out there offensively for UFC or USC. He's talented enough. So yeah, he'll certainly be in the top 3. I don't know, but with Will, Bryce, and CJ, in the conversation probably already, but probably top 5.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the receiving core that he has at SC is not fair. They're like 40 guys deep. Doesn't make any sense. Okay, I hate to put you on the spot, but is there one guy that we haven't talked about at the quarterback position that you expect a big year from?
I think the McCall kid from Coastal's a really fun player that could kind of shake up the tree a little bit when it comes to the draftable players. Will Levis, maybe from Kentucky. I know that they lost Liam Cohen and see how, I think Rich Scarnecchia is going to be their offensive coordinator, but Liam Cohen, just talent-wise, is built the right way. And if he has another really developed and progressed season, you can see his name start to be in the conversation for first round as well.
I love the McCall shout. I think he's going to be a tremendous player. We did something the other week. I could be too old for it. I don't know. I'd love to see him finish top 10 in Heisman voting. I think he'll have a lot more production this season. Some of their receivers leaving, some of the other talent like Shamari Jones and Ryan Beck's gone. I think he's going to have an uptick in production, and they're going to really try and get him into that NFL draft, first round, second round talk. So I think he's going to have a stupendous season. I love that you mentioned him. Levis is going to be really interesting to see. I really appreciate you for doing this, coming down here, sharing some QB wisdom. Very appreciated. Where could people find you? I mean, I'm sure people know where to find you, but
I'm on ESPN basically every day, so that's a good start. I don't even know what my Twitter name is. Dan Orlovsky 7 maybe. So there, Instagram, I'm pretty easy to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could have worded that, but thank you so much for doing this. If you're still watching this, please make sure to like and subscribe, and appreciate y'all so much. Thank you.